Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
It's 4 o'clock in Chicago. It's 6 o'clock in Dallas, Texas. And it's 7 p.m. in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Hello, everybody. I'm Mad Dog Scipio, joined as I am. She's back for another night. Amelia the Pitbull Chapman. Why do you keep showing up?
Because you keep inviting me.
Why do you keep to me?
Because you keep inviting me and Anita likes me.
I like you. You can stay for a little bit. So what have you been up to, kid?
Not much, just trying to make sure that I avoid the rain.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. This weather's crazy here.
Yeah.
You know what it is? It gets so hot. It gets to a point where you can't handle any more heat.
Yeah.
And I think even the heat gets tired of it. So.
Yeah. Well, we're in hurricane season right now, so you can actually time your watch by what time.
You live in Florida too. That's right. Mm-hmm. I keep forgetting you live in Florida. Anyway, Mike Lynch is back with us tonight. He's back. Mike showed up. I expected him to show up. I thought for sure you were going to quit after last night.
No, I'm still here.
All right, beautiful. How are you, Mike? What's happening, kid?
Oh, doing okay. Busy day, but here I am.
Brother, I have to tell you something. We get a fair amount of mail on this show. Quite a bit, actually. People like you.
Oh,
they tell us that you're very knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of this in our emails. I didn't know that.
Oh.
I didn't know. Where does Mike Lynch get his info from? I didn't know that. I'm going to go look it up. This is the kind of stuff we get.
Well, good. I'm glad they're going to do that. That validates what we're saying.
We're probably going to get more of that tonight.
Yep. Also, we got send me the link again to the Alcatraz shows. They sent me that information.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Oh, for
mm-hmm.
sure. Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh God, yeah, we're going to promote Mike's. But at the end of the show, because don't forget, Mike's going to be with us tomorrow night as well. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow night's the big one. Tomorrow night is going to be what we used to call in the wrestling business a Donnybrook. Okay, and the Donnybrook means all bets are off, all hell may break loose. Batten down the hatches and Katie bar the door over there.
The main event.
Yep. It's going to be a good one. It's certainly going to be a contentious one. I can tell you that. When last we left off, we were breaking this down into 3 parts. We did Who Wrote the Bible last night, and that was fascinating because there were things I didn't know. Not much, but there was a few things I didn't know last night. Tonight, we are going to venture into what some people might consider forbidden territory. But we have to go there because we are journalists and we are investigative reporters, and that's what we do. We have to question. And I don't think God minds us questioning. I think God would be angry with us if we didn't question. So tonight, the question is, did Jesus really exist? And Mike Lynch, is there physical proof of Jesus the Christ? That's the first question. I'll start off with Mike. The easy question for you.
Well, I wish I could produce a photograph. Here's a photograph of Jesus, but I can't do that.
Well, as a matter
when you say physical proof, when you say physical proof, what do you mean?
Well, it's funny you say you would talking about holding a picture of Jesus. Well, actually, we can do that. There you go. These are photos, Mike, varying photos of the many faces of Jesus. That's the thing, and I guess that is the question. The perception that we have of Jesus Christ had to be based on something that someone saw. Would you agree with that?
Well, I saw a documentary many years ago about the Shroud of Turin, and I'm sure you know what the Shroud of Turin is.
We will talk about that tonight.
It goes back to firm history into the 1300s. That's when they last did an examination of it scientifically. The DNA on the strands that they chose for the shroud go back to about the 1350s thereabouts, and they said it's not authentic because obviously it was in the Middle Ages when this item was supposedly created. But there are stories that go back hundreds and hundreds of years before that are not as strongly chronicled. There are allusions to the Shroud of Turin,
right?
And the most famous part of the shroud, of course, is the face of Jesus. And there was a photographer, an Italian photographer in the 1890s, who took a photograph of the shroud, and he realized when he was looking at the negative, that's where all the detail was. It wasn't in the positive that we can see, but in the negative that it really comes to life. And those are the pictures that you see on the internet or in books or documentaries. And it's that face that you can see that many people believe that is sort of the template of our modern version of Jesus with the long face and nose and long hair.
Yeah.
That it really goes back to the shroud, most likely, if it did exist, say for 2,000 years, or at least, long before the 1350 date that we have. So that's sort of a competing theory of where did we get the image of Jesus?
Well, the photographer that you referred to was actually Father Francisco Pio, Padre Pio. And Padre Pio, upon taking a picture of an image of Jesus Christ, when he looked at the negative, found something very interesting. He saw more detail than he had planned on. And therein lies the controversy of the Shroud of Turin. I am not by any means discounting it. In fact, quite frankly, I will tell you, and I've said this before, I believe that to be genuine. And interesting that Amelia reminded me before we went on the air today that it was exactly 1 year ago today that we did our Shroud of Turin show. So it is quite serendipitous, perhaps, Mike Lynch. It's divinely inspired that you're here. I'd like to believe that God has his hand in a little bit of everything that we do, and I'm sure he does. Given that information, how plausible is it, in your opinion, that this, by all accounts, it's probably a 12 to 14 foot piece of, linen, I guess, if you want to call it material.
Yes.
And probably, they say maybe 20 inches wide, Mike, somewhere around there. A couple feet wide. Yeah. And so, but it's important. It's very important. The dimensions of this thing are critical because it had to cover a full-size male that was at least 6 feet tall.
Yes.
Which in itself was unusual. Jesus was considered very tall for the time because they were shorter.
Yes.
That's why many people believe that he was, divine, because he was such a large statured man. There's a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to be here for a while. Yeah. The other thing we have to discuss is the nature of how much stock do we put in the shroud and how much is just faith. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's faith, is it not?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is in the New Testament, there's an encounter where Jesus has with the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders of the time. And they were asking for a miracle. Give us a miracle and we'll believe. And so he says, the only miracle you're going to get is the miracle of I'm just trying to blank. It's not Noah. It was I'm just drawing a blank right now. He was swallowed by the fish.
Jonah.
Jonah, thank you, Jonah. The miracle of Jonah, that for 3 days he would be in the belly.
That's what I'm here for, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate you bailing me out. It was the miracle of Jonah. 3 days. Jonah was according to the book of Jonah, that he was swallowed by the fish and then spit out in Assyria to preach at Nineveh. And Jesus says that's the only miracle you're going to get. Well, that miracle was obviously referring to his death on the cross, buried for 3 days and then rose again on the third day on Sunday.
Right.
And he's saying that is the ultimate miracle that you're going to get. And if you don't believe that, then you won't believe anything. So Jesus was saying that he performed miracles to people, he healed people. The Gospels are filled with miraculous accounts of Jesus doing things. And some people just wouldn't believe. For whatever reason, it was beyond their ability to accept that this is divine, that it's supernatural. And a number of times when Jesus specifically would heal on the Sabbath, which was considered work, and in the Jewish background, you can't do work on the Sabbath, which is on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And today, many Jews follow that strict code of not working on Saturday.
Yeah.
They're following the law that God gave them. When he would perform a miracle, they would say, well, you can't be the Messiah because you're violating the law that God gave us. They just couldn't see the miracle for what it was. They were looking at the rules.
The Bible, and we're talking about the Bible last night. We're talking about, was Jesus real? The Bible is based almost exclusively, and then really, if you think about it, it is almost exclusively a book of faith from the first page to the final chapter in Revelation. It's largely, what do you believe? Who do you believe? Are you willing to trust? And when we talk about Jesus being a real person, or the possibility that he may not have been, or certainly there are people who believe that Jesus existed, but they question at some level his divinity, his connection to the Godhead. I certainly don't do that because I don't want to get struck down because I'm not stupid. But on some level, we almost have to, Mike. I think we almost have to question the existence of Jesus. Am I wrong about that? If I am, please tell me.
No, there's an example when Paul was evangelizing. He goes to a town of Berea.
Okay.
And he's preaching Jesus. He's preaching from, like we were talking about yesterday, there's the New Testament, Old Testament. Mm-hmm. So for him, he's preaching from the Hebrew Bible, and he's pointing out examples from the Hebrew Bible of prophecies of Jesus that are sort of sprinkled throughout all of what we would call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And he would say Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies in his life and death and resurrection. Many hundreds of times. Hundreds of prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus. And so when he preaches this to the Bereans, it says that they examined the scripture to see that it was so. And Paul refers to them as noble-minded. He's complimenting them that they're not just taking Paul's word for it. They're saying, okay, Paul, we're going to examine this. We're going to question you. We're going to challenge you to make sure that everything you're saying is true. And he commended them for it. So that tells me it's okay to question, and if you really are sincerely trying to find the truth.
Amelia, questions from Mike Lynch.
I mean, I believe that Jesus was a real person because I know that he was put down here as human to bleed like a sweat, and of course, also be here as well. And also with the Last Supper, do you believe that Mary Magdalene was in the Last Supper photo, as well as everybody was seeing?
Well, are you referring to the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci?
Yes, the one that was painted.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're sort of alluding to the blood of Mary, that she that she is the cup of Jesus. The whole Dan Brown book that he wrote, about which was actually based on real work. You know, he didn't invent that story when he wrote his book,
Right.
The Da Vinci Code.
Mhm.
I had actually saw a documentary before long before the book was written and the movies came out about some French researchers that said that, you know, Jesus married Mary
Mhm.
Magdalene, and that their ancestors or their you know, their great grandchildren are living in France somewhere, kind of a thing. So this is not a new idea. You know, that was just, you know, Da Vinci's interpretation of the Last Supper. I mean, there's so many things wrong with that painting.
I have a
that are of its
question, right?
time.
Mm.
I have a question right there. I'm gonna, Amelia, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna piggyback off of your
Yeah,
question,
please,
and I'll
because I know you
throw it
would.
right back to you.
Mhm.
I'm gonna throw it right back to you. I don't just want to piggyback off of this just for a second.
Mhm.
Mike, do you believe in that photo of, you know, we say photo, that painting, you know,
The
Da
painting.
Vinci's The Last Supper,
Mhm.
by the way, which is in dire need of preservation and restoration. It is absolutely decaying at
It is.
a rapid rate. And I would
Mhm.
hate for that to just vanish.
Yes.
But do you believe that is John next to Jesus as the traditional story goes? Or is that Mary? Because that looks feminine to me.
It does.
That does not look like John the Divine or John the Younger, as they called him. It doesn't even look male. That looks like a female next to Jesus. By virtue of the fact that you could look and they're actually touching hands.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
If
the
you
only
look
real
at it, they're touching
description that
hands.
we have of the Last Supper, you know, as far as people were seated, comes from the Gospel of John, where
Right?
he refers to himself in an indirect way as the disciple who loved Jesus. That's how he identifies himself.
Yes.
And he was the one that was leaning against Jesus at the Last Supper. That's the only placement that we have of the disciples is from John. The others are there, of course, but it doesn't tell us where they were seated. But of course, it's a small room. It's a very low table. You're sort of reclining on the table. It's a very, you know, it's only like a foot tall. It's very short.
Mike, I did a show. Well, Amelia, I guess it
Yeah.
was about a year, about this time.
After we did that, yes.
Yeah, and we did a show on the Last Supper. The entire show was based on
Mhm.
the
Holy
painting,
Grail.
the perception of the Last Supper.
Yes, we did.
And one of the things that was a real bone of contention was that's not John.
No.
Nobody that we spoke to that night said there's no way that's John. That's a woman.
Yes.
We could still argue that point, but we know that historically, we know based on the evidence, the scripture, the historical accounts, we know that the Last Supper did take place. Jesus was there. His disciples were there. So we can say in that regard, yes, Jesus absolutely was a real person. He actually existed. Here is the quagmire. And this may get into some sacrilege, but I'm willing to I'm not going to risk my faith, but I am going to risk asking some pointed questions.
Fire away.
Okay. Was Jesus divine?
Yes.
How do we prove it?
Well, we have the Gospels. We have Luke's account, and we have Matthew's account, which give, you know, the narratives about Jesus's birth. Mm-hmm. You have the story of Gabriel, the archangel, coming to Mary and telling her that she's going to be receiving a special she's going to conceive Jesus via the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And we talked about last night that, you know, there's the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You know, it's the Godhead, the 3 in 1, one God, 3 personalities.
Right.
However that works, we don't understand that, but that's how God self-describes.
That's another show, brother.
Yeah. So So Jesus was born of the Holy Spirit. You know, the Gospels make that very clear. Now, there are other accounts of Jesus that are not as well known. Like, for example, there's the famous story when Jesus is in a house. He's preaching to people. The house is full of people. It's so crowded you can't get in. And there's the 4 friends who are bringing the paralytic on a mat, and they can't get in. So they go on the roof and they tear a hole in the roof and lower Jesus to the floor because they were so concerned for their friend. They wanted Jesus to heal him. And the Pharisees were there to kind of see, what is Jesus going to do? You know, is he going to do something that we can kind of trap him or get him?
Yeah.
And Jesus, it says, it perceives their thoughts, and he says, is it easier for me to forgive him of his sins or tell him to arise and walk? And he, of course, he performs a miracle. He tells him, gets up, he arises and he walks. But Jesus also, before that happens, says, your sins are forgiven. Well, that's sacrilege. If he is not God, he just commit a sacrilege, because who can forgive sins but God alone? So Jesus is putting himself in the position of God by saying, I forgive your sins.
Well,
So
that
divine?
is interesting. Let me just ponder this for a second, because I don't want to get myself in trouble with heaven. Because it's, God knows, it's, you know, Lord, it's easy enough for me to get in trouble on my own, Mike.
And I'll give you another example.
Go ahead.
When Jesus rose from the dead, he appears to the disciples several times after his resurrection.
Okay, let's go.
And then, of course, you have the famous story of doubting Thomas.
Yep.
He appears to the disciples, but Thomas wasn't there, right?
Yep.
And Thomas says, well, unless I can see it, put my hands in the holes and in his side, I'm not going to believe. And then a week later, Jesus shows up. And when he shows him, like, look, here are my wounds, Thomas immediately just drops. He goes to his knee and he says, my Lord and my God. So he's calling Jesus God, and Jesus does not rebuke him. He does not correct him. He accepts the title given to him that you are God. So he believed he was God. So the question for us is he God, or is he either lying or deceived, self-deceived?
Okay, let us assume the position that Martin Scorsese was right in his adaptation of The Last Temptation of Christ, which is an amazing movie. Let's assume, just for argument's sake, that Jesus was married and had children and was on some level divine and believed himself to be God. Short of God himself coming down from the heavens and saying, son, let's go home, and that never happened. Some people say it did, but it actually never happened. You have to ask yourself the question, in all seriousness, where does he come up with some of the thought processes, some of the arguments he makes for his divinity, and why was he willing to suffer so greatly when it would have been so easy for him to say, no, I'm not that guy, man. It would have been, he could have just, like, the whole thing could have just blown over. But he went and doubled down on it when Pilate said, are you he, the one they call the Lord? He said, I am, or however he said it. He said,
no, I am. Yahweh. He
said, I am.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. And Pilate knew what he meant by I am, because they knew. They understood it. Let me tell you what we come up with today. And this is, it was interesting. It's, there is it claims, the author here claims that there is no archaeological evidence archaeological evidence of Jesus does not exist. That was the claim. He goes on to say there is no definitive physical or archaeological evidence of the existence of Jesus. There's nothing conclusive, nor would I expect there to be. And his name is Mykytiuk, Dr. Mykytiuk, professor, actually. Peasants don't normally leave an archaeological trail. The reality is that we don't have archaeological records for virtually anyone who lived in the time of Jesus and the place. the historical argument for Jesus is, I want to talk about this because it's critical. The historical argument for Jesus is the lack of evidence does not mean that a person at the time did not exist. It means that she or he, like 99.99% of the rest of the world at the time, made no impact on the archaeological record. I would beg to differ. I would think you would almost have to believe that Jesus made some kind of an impact, either on the history or the locations or the psyche of the mindset of the time. Certainly that had to carry over from generation to generation. If not, Mike, then why do we have the Gospels? We talked about this last night.
I'm going to give you 3 examples to show why I believe Jesus existed. Now, you are absolutely correct. There's nothing physical that we have that verifies Jesus physically, historically. There's, like I said, there's no photograph. Technology didn't exist at the time. So the only thing we have are people's accounts, what they said, what they saw. Yeah. So the first one I want to read is from Paul, the apostle, and this is one of the first books of the Bible. So this is written in late 40s, early 50s. And this is in 1 Corinthians 15, and I'll start in verse 3. It says, "For I handed down to you as of the first importance, which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scripture, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," which is another name for Peter, the apostle, "and then to the 12, so the rest of the apostles. And after that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom remain now, but some have fallen asleep," which is a reference for death.
Yes.
So when Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, he's saying he appeared to Peter, then to the 12, and then to 500 people at one time. Now, these letters that Paul wrote were open letters. They weren't hidden. They weren't, put in a cave and nobody could see them. They were very open documents, and they were copied and sent to other churches.
Yeah.
And so Paul is saying there are approximately 500 eyewitnesses who saw Jesus after he had risen from the dead, who could testify, yeah, he died and I saw him. So that's testimony from all. So if anybody would say that's not true, they can come forward and say that's a lie.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. Now, these are, many people, of course, the Bible is going to say that. People can say, yeah, they're for Jesus, so they'll say anything to make their point. Well, there are actually extra biblical sources that refer to Jesus, which means this is coming from outside the Bible that are talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
And the first one is from Josephus, who is a very famous Jewish historian.
Yep, Flavius Josephus.
Right. He was Jewish, but he was working for the Romans, and he was writing histories. He was a historian.
Yeah.
And this is his most famous account of Jesus that he wrote, and I'll just read it to you. It's very short.
Yes, sir.
He's writing this at around the year 100.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, so this is about 70 years after after he had died and rose into heaven. It says, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared alive again the 3rd day, as the divine prophets had foretold. These and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him and the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day." So you're getting some very strong parallels to what Josephus is saying around the year 100 to what the gospel writers are saying, in the New Testament. I'm going to read one more. This one's a lot shorter. It's from Tacitus, who was actually a Roman. This is in approximately 115. So this is about 15 years after Josephus's account.
Yep.
And Tacitus was not a friend of the church. He is opposed to Christianity, and this is what he writes. He says, "Christus," that's how he's referring to Jesus, Christus or Christ, "from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius, at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, Christianity, thus, check for the moment again, broke out not only in Judea, but even in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So Tacitus is saying Jesus was a man who started this superstition in Judea. So in any historical record, I mentioned this yesterday, for something to be considered true or correct or historically valid, you get two independent sources of information saying exactly the same thing. And I gave you Josephus and Tacitus, and they're both saying that Jesus was alive, and they describe accurately what Christianity is about.
Therein lies the problem. As you read the passage from Flavius Josephus, I have the same passage here. And it says, did Josephus really write this? Most scholars think that the core of the passage originated from Josephus, but it is widely agreed that the passage was later altered by Christian editors, possibly between the 3rd and 4th century AD. Would you agree with that being plausible?
Yes, I think it is plausible. That is, the information we have from, 2000 or 1800 years ago is scattered, and we don't have a complete picture. So that is possible that they sort of seized on Josephus and sort of added to it. But I will say this, that there are 39 extra biblical sources of information that refer to Jesus that are outside the Bible. So you can throw Josephus out and saying, okay, it's been tainted, it's not accurate. But there are, like I said, the Titus one is very clear about who Jesus was and that Pilate had crucified him. And then there are other sources that also corroborate the New Testament in many different ways. So get rid of one, you got many, many others that say Jesus was a man, he was alive, he was in Judea, he started this religion or superstition that the Romans didn't like, and they were persecuting the Christians. So it would be very difficult to say that, at least in a human sense, Jesus did not exist. I think anybody who examines the information can say, yes, there was a man named Jesus who lived in Palestine around the year 30, and he was crucified for his teachings and may have rose from the dead if you believe in this supernatural part of the story. But the fact that he existed, I don't think anybody can say when they really look at the evidence that that's not the case.
Yeah. To put it in the words of Dr. Bard Myers, from I believe he is from University of Cairo. He says those who deny, quote, those who deny the existence of Jesus are like those deniers of climate change, unquote.
Yeah. And
I think that's as simple and as accurate and as fair as you can get.
Absolutely.
It's also pretty close to the point. But there is one.
I want to say something else too.
Sure.
And this is an indirect argument for the Gospels. You have the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They refer to people, they refer to places, they refer to geography. And if those things are inaccurate, if you said let's say one of the epistle writers say, oh, it really wasn't Pontius Pilate, it was this other guy that was the governor at the time of Jesus. Right. Well, then you can question the gospel because that information is incorrect.
Yeah.
And so you can go and you can validate the information of all these historical pieces of information that they're claiming happened at the time of Jesus. And if that information is accurate, if the people, places, geography, they're quoting from the Old Testament, the historic or the religious practices of the time when they would go to Passover, when they would have the Feast of Booths and other kinds of things that they had to follow as Jews, because all of Jesus' followers were Jews. Right. I mean, the early church was Jewish and became Gentile later.
Right.
At least if that information is accurate, then the claims that they make, at least you have to say, okay, I have to at least concede the point that could also be accurate as well. Why would it be accurate in one area and completely wrong in another?
Well, that's a valid point. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you what, we are going to continue this right after this break. We will be back from our friends at Shopify.
Jess wanted to start a business when something surprising happened.
Today, I'm going to teach you how to crochet.
She started crocheting, like a lot. and her friends noticed.
Jess, you need to sell those.
So she signed up for Shopify and started building her business.
Yes, I love that.
And after a lot of hard work, this happened.
Oh my gosh, I just made my first sale!
You see, every day, hundreds of businesses get their first sale on Shopify.
We got ding!
And the next could be you. So when you're ready to bring your idea to life
And become your own boss.
build it on Shopify.
America's Best Podcast on the record. This is the Mad Dog. She is the Pitbull, and we are joined by Mike Lynch. WWTF Radio, BRS Global around the world is live and in person. Tonight, a controversial subject matter, but we have to cover it because it's important. We got to do these things from time to time. We got to get serious. And tonight we're going to do that. Mike, I have a slideshow I put together here. I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay.
Let me just set this up here. I was looking for, actually, it was this that set me off, to be honest with you. And I think I already put this up. The archaeological evidence of Jesus does not exist. That's the argument. That's the argument. But then again, I come across, well, I'll just show you. Why don't I do that? So let me show you something. This was discovered in 1998.
Wow.
There are two photos of it. It is the ossuary of the family of Joseph, Mary, James, and Jesus of Bethlehem. This is one shot. Here is the other. Here's my question, Mike. If in fact that is the ossuary of the biblical Jesus, James, Mary, and Joseph, then the whole resurrection story flies out the window, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Now, just for your audience, so they may not know what an ossuary is. So what they would do is at that time when you died, they would usually were buried in a cave. And Jesus, when he was taken off the cross, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a wealthy man, goes to Pilate and asks for the body with Nicodemus, who was one of the Pharisees. We meet him in John chapter 3 when he goes to meet Jesus at night because he doesn't want to be seen, because he's quote unquote the enemy. Right. And he Jesus tells him the famous, you have to be born again if you're going to be saved. And they have sort of a theological debate. So the two of them go to Pilate, ask for the which was a big risk. I mean, Jesus was an enemy of the state. He was executed by the Roman government. And for them to openly say, we want Jesus's body so we can bury him, is showing that their allegiance to Jesus. And they could have gotten in trouble for that. And so they showed great courage going to Pilate, because he could have had them crucified as well as being, working with him to supplant, Rome and Caesar, because that was the accusation made against Jesus, that he was claiming to be a king and, he's challenging Caesar's authority. So anyway, so they asked for the body and they buried him in Joseph's tomb. Well, normally you were left in the tomb for many months, and so the decaying process can kind of have its way with the body. And then after the body had decayed and all the flesh and bone, the flesh and all the the soft material, it was gone. That it was just bones that were left. Well, they took the bones and they put them in a box, and that's the box that you're looking at. That's what's called an ossuary.
Yes. Okay, so here is the argument. A number and a growing number of respected theologians who have teamed with science are now changing their tune on the resurrection theory. And they're calling it just that, the resurrection theory. They're saying that Jesus, in fact, did not resurrect, that Jesus's body was stolen from the tomb, taken out of the tomb for its own protection, because there were a number of people who wished to do damage to him. These are, you can check this stuff out, folks. I kid you not.
I want to address that. I want to address that. So, according to the Gospels, when Jesus was buried in the tomb, Caiaphas, who was the high priest, he was the one that really instigated the arrest and eventual execution of Jesus with Pilate. He goes to Pilate and says, we're afraid that the body's going to be stolen, and then his disciples are going to claim, oh, he rose from the dead. Look, the tomb is empty. And it would be this tremendous lie. And so what Pilate does is he sends a squad of soldiers, Roman soldiers, to guard the tomb, and not only guard the tomb, to seal the tomb, so that if you tried to roll the rock away, there's evidence of movement. And these guards had orders to guard the tomb, and if they did not fulfill their duty, they would have been executed. That was the punishment for not doing their duty. So the idea that at this point there's only 11 disciples because Judas Iscariot had hung himself. So there's 11 disciples going against approximately 30 well-trained, well-armed Roman soldiers, overpowering them, rolling a 2-ton stone away, getting the body of Jesus and taking it who knows where. And then what happens is when the Pharisees, when the resurrection happens, of course, the tomb is empty. The guards flee because they're terrified. So then the Pharisees go to the guards and say, don't worry about it, because they know they were going to be executed. That's why they're very upset. They're very worried. And so they pay the guards to say that the disciples stole the body, and we'll make it okay with Pilate that you won't be killed. So it doesn't hold up to the information when you look at it of what the practice was of the Romans at that time. They had to lie and pay them to tell this lie that Jesus had been resurrected, when that would have never happened, because, like I said. So
is that where the story escalated from?
That's where it comes from. It's in the Gospels.
Well, now it makes, because I just want people to know I'm not blowing smoke up your butt. Okay, this is for real. You can check this stuff out.
Now, I do want to comment on the ossuary. The guy who did that, the guy who discovered this, was a known forger. He had a shop in his apartment where he had all these different artifacts, many different real artifacts of that time. And then what he would do is he would put names and things on it to make it more valuable. I mean, if it had the name of Jesus on there and Mary and James and so forth.
Here's the thing about that, Mike. It's supposedly this was discovered by a well-respected archaeologist named Simka Yakubovich. Who I'm sure he had a show on television called The Naked Archaeologist, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I've seen the show.
Okay, so you know who Simka is. All right. He's the one who claims to have found it.
Okay. I have seen documentation to show that the person who supposedly procured this box changed it. That when they were looking at, there was a name.
I don't doubt that whatsoever.
There were some names on it, and then he added some names, and that there's differences between the names. And it's a very common practice in archaeology. When you add something to it to make it more valuable, you're going to make a lot of money. So it's really fallen into disrepute. I don't think most. I mean, there might be some believers, but most I don't think are.
Like the Holy Grail, for example, they said it was a gold cup decorated really nice that Jesus would have drank out of. And we know at the time it would have been maybe a wooden bowl that they would have drank their water from. Now, the Holy Grail, we believe rumored to have been a child of Jesus named Sarah.
Well, that's one of the, can I jump in here?
Oh, please.
That's one of the arguments being made, that the Holy Grail was not, in fact, a chalice or a cup.
Correct.
That the quote unquote Holy Grail, if there was such a thing,
exactly,
that it was a child. Now, by the way, the story of the Holy Grail, just so you know, there's nowhere in the Bible that talk about a Holy Grail. That story was perpetuated by the Templar Knights, and so just so you know your history. It was perpetuated by the Templar Knights, who said that they were charged with the task of retrieving this precious and holy grail. quote
that
unquote.
Jesus drank out of. Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
But be that as it may, I don't think I'm not going to answer for Mike on this, but I think it's a lot of BS to be honest with you. Let's continue with this. Okay, Mike, are you familiar with this at all? Proof that there was another place, verified proof, by the way, that there was another place called Bethlehem.
This I've not heard.
Okay, let me read this to you. Every Christmas, thousands of pilgrims stream into Bethlehem to celebrate the birth of Jesus. It's the major event of every year in the West Bank town, but Israeli archaeologists now say there is strong evidence that Jesus the Christ was born in a different Bethlehem, a small village in Galilee, about 100 miles north of where pilgrims gathered. Shepherds still guide their flocks through green, unspoiled hills, and a few give notice to tucked away village within the odd sounding name. It's called Bethlehem of the Galilee. But archaeologists who have excavated there say there is simple evidence and ample evidence that this is the Bethlehem of the Bible and the Bethlehem of Christ's birth. Quote, I think the genuine site of the nativity is here rather than in the other Bethlehem near Jerusalem, says Ovaram Oshri, an archaeologist with the Israeli Antiquities Authority, which has excavated the area extensively. He stands on the side of the road now that cuts through the entranceway to the village, and it was construction of this road that led to this discovery. As they were turning the ground over, Mike, to build this road, they came upon this archaeological find. Your thoughts about this?
Well, like I said, I've not heard this theory before. I do know that the traditional Bethlehem outside of Jerusalem is just a few miles away, small little town. That's where David was born. And of course, Jesus is also referred to as the son of David. So that's probably why they had it there.
Yeah.
And of course, Joseph and Mary were from Bethlehem. You know, when we have the gospel accounts where they had to go back for the census, they go to Bethlehem, of course.
Yeah.
Because that's where their family was from, and that's where they had to be taxed for the Roman Empire. I'm not sure how that would change anything if it was one Bethlehem versus another Bethlehem. I think the headline of the story is that the Messiah has come, not where he stayed.
Well, here's the question I have: is it 6 of one, half a dozen of another? Does it really matter?
I don't think it really matters. Because it's more about
that. I'm good with that answer.
Yeah, it's like, okay, maybe we got it wrong. Who knows? But if it's another Bethlehem, well, it's still Bethlehem then.
Well, exactly, right? Let's take a look at this, Mike. Okay, now this here, if you want to know what a crucifixion looks like, this is a small sample. This is an actual spike through an ankle bone. Even many thousands of years later, it still looks painful to me.
Yes.
And it goes right through. Take a look at this stuff. It's pretty stark. All right, let's get into some speculation here, Mr. Lynch.
Sure.
The cathedral at Notre Dame, which has burnt down and is now being rebuilt. They claim to have this document that you're looking at. It is allegedly the authentic crown of thorns placed upon Jesus's head. Your thoughts, my friend?
Well, I will say this. As in the ensuing centuries, when the church was growing, 6th century, 7th century, 8th century, going into the Middle Ages,
right?
For a church to be considered a church, you had to have some kind of a connection to the apostles, disciples, the early church fathers.
Yeah.
And so the way that they did that was through bones, hair, pieces of the cross, the crown of thorns, the spear, things like that connect to the Gospels in some way.
Right.
And so they had to have a relic of some kind. This is the finger of John the Baptist, or this is the foot of so and so. And so there was a very lucrative trade throughout the Middle East and Europe where people would go around to different churches and say, I have the whatever of somebody that's important that will make your church an actual church, not just a building. And then one of the reasons that the churches were eager to have these items was then that church would be a site of a pilgrimage. People would do pilgrimage to that church. And a pilgrimage means money, that you give money to the church to touch it, to look at it, to be a part of it in some way, or have like a feast of some kind and participate. And so I would say that nearly every single thing that people claim to be true, I don't believe it is true, because I think it was just this trade that existed for centuries.
I'm with you, brother. I think it's, I'm just going to say this. I have seen the Cathedral of Notre Dame. I will tell you that it is a majestic and magnificent structure. It is awe-inspiring, but I think it's a money grab. I think they're full of caca, and I don't believe for one moment that this artifact is, in fact, the crown of thorns.
No, I don't believe it is.
Amelia, what are your thoughts on that, Emil?
I don't believe it is, because I think anything like that with thorns would have already disintegrated by that time. I don't think they would.
You would think it would have had to long been gone.
Yeah, long been gone.
I would just from a wear and tear standpoint.
Yes, because
from a weather perspective.
I have an aunt that has roses across the street from my mom's house, and when after like winter time, they just get them and they just.
Oh God, yeah, for sure. Again, this is these are nails that are taken from the wrist of a crucified man. They are actually, and you're going to see something tonight where they came from. They are actual nails. You can see they were bent. They were hammered in and they were bent. This is for real. This is all real stuff. Mike, the enigma of the Shroud of Turin, my friend.
Yes.
Let's get into the historical Jesus versus the reality of who Jesus is. You'll notice I say is and not was, because he still is.
Yes.
Even I'm not stupid enough to step on that one, baby. Let me tell you.
Because he still is.
Let's talk about this, Mike. This is your area of expertise. All right. The historical Christ versus the reality. We have been led to believe that Jesus was this fair-skinned, glowing, beautiful creature that loved all who came upon him. We know that's not true. We know that he had a temper. We know that he was not a white man. He was a person of color. He certainly had darker skin, more darker than lighter. We know that he was not, he was groomed of the day. He had, like many people did, he had matted hair and he had darker skin and lived the life that he lived like a man, God in the flesh. God wanted to find out what it was like to be human. He created us. So I guess he had to find out, like, what we go through. It's a mess, Lord. It really is. So your thoughts, Mr. Lynch.
So what specifically, because you kind of threw out several things.
Okay, so here's the deal. We're talking about the entire show is based around the premise that, was Jesus real? Okay, we've established that we believe he was a real person. Okay. So what about the perceptions? The perceptions of Jesus. What do we have wrong about what we perceive Jesus? What or who we perceive Jesus to be? Was he this loving, fair-skinned, all knowing, kind and gentle soul? Or was he a ruffian like the guys he hung around with? My gut tells me Jesus was an ass kicker.
Well, one of the stories I mentioned yesterday was the woman at the well. Someone who was an outcast in her society.
Yeah.
Who was a fallen woman, and when Jesus treats her with great dignity and great compassion.
Okay.
And he's violating a number of practices of the day. For a man to be talking to a woman in public was a big taboo, and he does. And he wants to bring healing to her life. And she's so touched by what he does is that she, after their encounter, she goes to the townspeople and say, come see this man that told me everything about myself. She's so overwhelmed by his compassion that the people that hate her, she goes to them and says, come see this man. And she spent several days there. Whereas we also talked about when he was talking to people who had an issue of self-righteousness and hypocrisy, he was very hard on them. And we have this, the famous story when he goes into the temple and he overturns the tables and he, makes a whip and chases everyone out, saying this is a house of prayer and you've made it into a house of merchandise, of money,
a den of iniquity.
Right. This is God's house. This is a house of prayer, and you turn it into something, ugly.
Yep.
And he says, I will not stand for this. So you were right. He got angry.
Oh yeah, he was pissed.
Righteous anger. So he needed to be firm when he had to be firm, and he needed to be loving when he needed to be loving and compassionate and forgiving. And when people would come to them and say, Jesus, heal me, please heal me. I'm blind or I have leprosy or something. He would stop and heal them. He would feel compassion for them and he would do something about it because they were suffering.
Yeah.
So Jesus was a very complex person. He wasn't some guy floating on the ground that sort of spoke with an angelic voice. He was a real person. And as you pointed out earlier, he got hungry, he got tired, he got thirsty. He was somebody who experienced, just the everyday struggles that we do.
Which is good. I mean, it is good. It's good that he understands our plight because he lived it.
Exactly. Yes. Hebrew talks about the book of Hebrews talks about that. He went through everything we did. So he understands us because he was one of us.
Yep. Here's a bit of an analysis, Mike. I want to take maybe 5 minutes or so and talk about the shroud. There's a lot going on this shroud. I want to point out a couple of things that just from the physics of it, don't make a whole lot of sense to me, because if you look at the shroud head on as we're looking at it, it literally looks like a photograph.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. And there are two reasons given for that. Number one, those in favor of the resurrection theory will say that the resurrection was tantamount to a burst of energy coming out of the body of Jesus.
Yes.
Those against the resurrection will say it was a finely crafted forgery by Da Vinci himself. Okay. I make the argument, again, I always err on the side of caution and practicality, because honestly, you can't look at that. If you're me, you can't look at that and say that that's a photo, that's a picture. In some ways, yes, it is. But then again, is that not what a photograph is? It's a burst of energy, Mike, is it not?
Yeah, it's the sun's energy that goes on a plate that's receptive and it creates an image.
I am so happy that I got Mike Lynch agreeing with you. Don't even know.
Right?
No, I've studied the Shroud of Turin over the years. I don't claim to be an expert, but I know some things about it. And one of the things, I mean, you can find evidence on both sides to say, yes, it's a fake, or no, it's authentic. But
Right.
one of the things that I find that's an interesting little tidbit for those that say yes, it's real, is that if you look, you have the hands pierced, the little arrow pointing to that, and it's pointing to
Yes.
his wrist.
Yes.
That the blood mark is on the wrist.
Right.
And if you look at, if this was done in the 1350s thereabouts, well, obviously it was the Catholic Church was very powerful at that time. They were commissioning works of art, paintings, sculptures, things like that. And whenever they had depictions of Jesus being crucified, even to this day with the crucifixion, it's always his hand, in the palm of the hand, the nail goes through there, and then he's suspended on the cross. Well, physically, that's not possible because the weight of a person, it would tear.
Oh my God! It would rip your hand right off. Right.
Yeah.
Right. However,
it would
if you
completely shred your hand.
Right, but if you put the nail in just above where the wrist is,
exactly,
it can hold the weight of a human body.
Yeah.
So this person, if it was a forgery, they were going against the modern practices of the palm crucifixion versus a wrist. So the person who did this knew anatomy, that the weight of a body cannot be held by if it was in the palm.
Well, you can clearly see with no compromise. You can clearly see that the wound mark is absolutely on the wrist. In fact, it's a bit above the wrist on this part of the forearm right here.
Right.
That's where you sustain the weight. That will hold your weight.
Right.
The human body is a remarkable thing. The other thing, and you can actually see it even at this distance, you can see the line of the crown of thorns that was on his head. The other thing you can see, and you're going to see it clearly in a moment, you can see the coins on his eyes, and they were Roman coins with the mark of Pilate on them. And I'm going to show you that right now. But here is the full scale front and back. And look at the back, Mike. Look at the stripe marks.
Right, the scourging
on the back. This person endured some serious torture.
I think it was like 120.
It was more. I'm sorry, Amelia. Go ahead.
I think they said it was like 120 wounds visible.
At least. Oh my God! At least, yeah. They just went crazy.
They had a cat of nine tails. So when you were whipped once, it was actually 3 wounds because there were 3 strands with little bits of metal on the end.
Yeah.
Oh.
If he was whipped, if he had 40 lashes, that would be at least 120 strikes.
Oh yeah.
I want you to take a look at this. It's really important right here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just move this wording out the way, and we'll do that right there. I would absolutely believe, without hesitation, that face I'm looking at is my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Yes. I would believe it in a heartbeat. I'm going to tell you why. Look at that man's face. He's absolutely haggard. He's worn. I mean, think about what you're looking at here. You're looking at a guy who has all but, at this point, all but gone to heaven, okay? Because he's still in this physical death phase, all right? Look at his eyes. There are coins on his eyes. Look at his mouth and his cheeks. That's a mustache. I don't care how you slice it or dice it. That's a beard. That hair is matted and there's blood in his hair. There's that white that you see, that's blood. That indicates liquid. Everywhere you see white indicates liquid. This man that you're looking at was beat unmercifully. Tell me what you see over here, Mike. What do you see that I don't?
No, I see exactly what you see. That you see the head wounds. One of the things that you can also see a little bit lower are the on the arms. There's the trickle of blood, and they're at different angles. It's not just one angle where the blood is dripping down his arms. It's different angles suggesting movement, because when you died of a crucifixion, you died of
Yeah.
asphyxiation. That
True.
by being suspended on a cross, your chest would slowly cave in. It would compress, and it
Yeah.
would compress against your heart and your lungs, and you had a harder time breathing. So the only way you can breathe was to push up with your feet, which was terribly painful because you have these spikes in your feet.
Yeah.
And you had to push up, and you're shifting your position to do that, to draw in a breath, and then you sort of collapse back down against the cross again.
Yeah.
So again, the artist knew that there was the movement of the body because the trickles of blood on the arms were at different angles.
Well, people don't understand that most people who died from crucifixion died long before the injuries and the wounds killed them. They died from lack of breath.
Right.
They died from asphyxiation, from suffocation, essentially.
And that's why in the gospel accounts, when it was the Passover was approaching, and they would be considered ritually unclean if you were still committing a crucifixion during the Passover.
Yeah.
That's why the Roman soldiers were told to break the legs of the two men with Jesus, the two convicted criminals, so they can no longer push up to draw breath, and they asphyxiate faster.
Yeah.
And when they come to Jesus, they see he's already dead because the guy stuck the spear in the side, and water and blood comes out. And that's when the water separates from the blood, that's a sign that you're dead. So he knew instantly that Jesus was no longer alive, and he didn't have to break his legs, which fulfills a scripture. I believe it's in Isaiah that talks about that none of his bones were broken.
We are looking at what some people believe is the authentic tomb of Jesus. I have a problem with this in some regards because as I'm searching and doing my research for the show, I found not one, not two, but 3 tombs, Mike, all claiming to, and you know where I'm going with this, sir.
Yeah.
I have found 3 tombs, all that claim to be the authentic tomb of Jesus.
Yep.
Now, let's talk about that one, Mike Lynch. One of the things that concerns me is that there was one Jesus. He had one life. He died. He was resurrected, and he's lived with the Father forever. Okay, so now we got that straight. Okay. But he could only have been buried in one place, right?
Yes.
Joseph of Arimathea, as I understand, gifted the family his personal crypt, his vault. Okay. So we know that historically. All right. Here's the problem, though. If you take a tour of Israel, they're going to take you to 3 different places where Jesus was buried. Well, where was he buried? You've got that location. You've got the Holy Sepulchre, where they say that he was buried there, and that's a task getting into that thing. You gotta be like a gymnast to get into this place, folks. I'm serious, Neil. You gotta like crawl underneath the thing to get your head under to see the rock. Mike, am I lying? Please tell me.
No, it's actually a small little chapel that they built, and then they built the large Church of the Holy Sepulchre over the original chapel.
Yeah, it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you're going to see it here in a moment. But let's look at this here, Mike. So they say that this is the tomb. All right, so let's see what we have here, Mike Lynch. We have a cave. We have a round stone. I highly doubt that that's the same stone used to roll the opening. I don't believe that for a moment. Because the other tomb I saw had a much larger stone, and it even had a little track that the stone rolled on. That was pretty fancy, that one. And then the next one I saw outside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre looks very primitive. It just looks like a cave with a rock in front of it. Mm-hmm. Of all the 3 that I've seen here, well, that I've seen, not here, of course, the one with the rock in front of it looks most plausible to me because it looks very antiquated. It looks very old. It looks like something that might have been used at the time, and it doesn't look fancy. That's the giveaway for me. These other two look too. Am I making sense, Mike? It looks too fancy to me.
Yeah, fancy.
Well, I mean, this is my personal belief. I don't think any. Well, maybe the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, maybe. I think
Right.
the other two are not. I mean, I know there's one that's considered the garden tomb, and that is a first century tomb.
Yes,
And
that's the one I'm
so,
talking about.
Yeah, it gives us an idea of what the tombs look like at the time. Was it the
Mhm.
tomb of Jesus? Most likely not. But you can say, okay, at least I can get a picture of what it would be like to bring in a body and lay it on the, on the little place where you can put the body when it was
Yeah.
decaying, and you can put on the herbs and the linen and so forth, all the practices that the Jews adhered to at the time. But the most important thing is, we have, the angels, when Mary and I think it's Mary and Mary went to go visit to the tomb on Sunday to finish the burial practices. They come to the angels and they said, well, he's not here, for he has risen. That is the most important thing. It's not where was Jesus buried. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if we knew exactly where it was, but
Right.
for the angel to send a message from God to say, it's not the empty tomb that's important. It's that Jesus had risen. He had conquered sin and death. That's why he came to earth that's why he was sacrificed. He allowed himself to be crucified on the cross so that he died for the sins of humanity.
So in essence, if I'm hearing what you're saying, it's like we spoke about before. It doesn't really matter, because the main point is that he raised from death to live with the Father forever, to conquer death.
Yes.
And that's the important part of the story.
That's the most important part.
Do you people realize out there that the entire Christian faith is based? And now listen to me now. This is because I got a guy here that's going to vouch for this. I'm not making any of this up. The entire Christian faith is based on one act. One. The resurrection of Jesus the Christ.
Yep.
Okay, that's it. If you believe nothing else, it doesn't matter. The resurrection is the key, the quintessential piece of information that you must believe. If you don't believe that, then you don't believe the rest of the story either.
Well,
Go ahead, Mike.
In John chapter 8, one of the things that Jesus says to people who are listening to him, saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And he proved his claims of divinity when he rose from the dead, because he says,
Right.
I'm a propitiation. I'm an offering for sin, which is a practice of the Jewish practice of the animal sacrifices, so that the nation of Israel could be forgiven of their sins, both collectively and individually.
Yeah.
And Jesus, refers to himself as a sacrifice. John the Baptist calls him the Lamb of God, because lambs were used in the sacrificial practice at the temple when it still existed. Yeah. And so Jesus, when you were absolutely right when you say when he rose from the dead, it proved that he conquered sin and death. So anybody who has faith in Jesus for who he is and what he did promises salvation to people. It's a simple gift of saying, if you receive this gift, you are given salvation. And that's the message of Christianity.
Amelia, questions for our amazing guest, Mike Lynch.
So also there was on the Shroud of Turin, there was also said to believe that was blood. Do you believe that was his blood as well?
If the Shroud of Turin is authentic, then it is likely his blood, because it's in the places where where the wounds of Jesus are recorded in the Gospels. The wounds are exactly the same in the Shroud of Turin: on the head,
Exactly.
the wrist, the feet, the side, on the back.
True.
They're all identical to what is described by the Gospel writers.
Everything verbatim is. If you look at the Shroud of Turin just as a historical piece, forget the religious or spiritual connotation to it. Okay. If you look at it strictly from a historical piece of archaeological find,
Yes.
that alone should be enough to convince you.
Because I remember when we did the show, we showed the negative part of it, and it showed that
Yeah.
part on there too. So I wanted to,
But
get his opinion as well.
then Amelia, if you factor in the spiritual context, the weight, the heavy weight with which is attached to it,
Yes.
and the legacy and the legend that's attached to it. There's a lot there, kid. Oh, there's a lot
I
there.
just want to mention one other thing. You were showing pictures earlier of a crucified person, and that the spike, because when you have, again, using Catholic imagery, both on the crucifix and through sculpture and through paintings, usually Jesus's feet, I kind of hold it up here, they're usually in front of each other, and the nail is through the top down kind of a thing. Well, they've actually found two crucified men, and they have identical wounds on their heels, that the feet are not together like this, but they're actually straddling the piece of wood that's holding up the crossbeam, and that the spikes are going in through the side, they're going in through the heels. And there's an interesting verse in the Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. This is after the fall of man in the garden. God tells them, don't eat from the fruit. You're going to know sin and death. Adam and Eve do it anyway. It's called, the fall or original sin. And God calls all three to account. You have Adam, Eve, and the serpent or the devil sort of, accounting for what they did. And God says this, very interesting. He says, and I will put enmity or division between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and it shall bruise your head, and he shall bruise you in the heel. So it's saying there's two seeds. There's the seed of the devil. There's the seed of God that's coming. The Apostle Paul makes this claim that Jesus is the seed that God refers to back in Genesis, but that there's going to be an event that's going to happen where Satan is going to be bruised in the head, or it's going to be a mortal wound against Satan. But Jesus is going to be wounded in the heel. And that's describing crucifixion, because that was the spikes in the heel that they used to crucify, their victims. So I find that an interesting description of a crucifixion going all the way back to the Garden of Eden that we have in the archaeological record.
You're actually going to see a crucifixion here in a second. Watch this. You are looking at the actual remains. These were dug up. This is how Jesus died. Extremely rare evidence of Roman crucifixion uncovered in Italy. And this article was from the Times of Israel. I want you to take a good look at this. I want you to see where the hands are. If you look, the hands are in front, just like Mike described. The hands are in front like this. Okay. And let me see if I can get a better shot here. Oh, that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Can you guys see that? Amelia, can you see that?
Well, the feet are covered by words.
Yeah, it's kind of like covered by the words a little bit, but
but that's the gist of it there. There's the Church of the Holy
You showed the
Sepulchre.
picture of the spikes, earlier, the actual photographs of a crucified foot.
Yes, exactly. Let's see what else we got. Here's the another picture of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You see what they did here, Amelia? They put this. You see the smaller building?
Yes.
It's inside this giant cathedral, and it's funny because it's in an area where all three of the world's predominant religions worship. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all there. And it's Mike, is it still a hotbed there?
Well, yes, especially in the old city, they're because obviously for Christianity and Judaism, their claims to Jerusalem being very important are pretty obvious. For Islam, it's not as well known that it's the third most holy site in Islam, because Muhammad had a vision one night, and he goes to Jerusalem in this vision, and he goes to the dome where the Dome of the Rock is, and he sort of I don't want to say jumps, but he goes from there up into heaven, and he has a heavenly experience with God. And so that's why it's the third most holy site, because he visited there in this vision-like state.
Yeah.
According to Islam.
This here is called the Pilot Stone, Mike.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what the Pilot Stone is.
So one of the claims of Christianity was that the idea that Pontius Pilate was the governor at the time of Jesus's life and his ministry. Well, there was no record of Pontius Pilate as governor until 1961, very recently.
Yeah.
And they found this stone. It's not a memorial. It's a. I'm losing the words right now, but anyway, it's to commemorate. I think it was to building like an amphitheater or something. And he referred to, it's Pontius Pilate, governor of Judea, is the reference. And so this is proof that Pontius Pilate existed, and he was of the time of Caesar, the Roman Emperor Tiberius.
Yeah. This is also from a I believe it was from a cave, and it has an interesting depiction here. They're saying the implication here is that this graffiti could be strong evidence of Jesus's existence. Certainly his existence, if not his crucifixion. If you look at this, Mike, there's something very interesting going on. You see a man with his hands out with a beam on the beam, but the thing is, look at the face. It's a horse head.
Right. Yeah. It's like they're mocking him.
Okay. I was going to ask you why the horse head, because that's not the first time I've actually seen that, Mike.
That would be my guess, that it was making fun of it rather than
mockery.
It.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And let's check the next one out. Again with the what we already discounted that. Here you go. These were some 200 years after Jesus' crucifixion. The earliest, and they're calling them the earliest images, and 200 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. I don't know how you want to define time. I guess, it's fairly recent. 200 years, I guess, was recent. Yeah. In that, I don't know. I guess guess it was. But if you look at what we're depicting here, it certainly looks like a crucifixion. What do you see there, Mike? I see a centurion. I see a man in a box. I see someone here carrying what looks like, and I don't know, another. I don't know what it is. What would you want to call that?
Well, I'm reading the little title here, and it seems to be the story of the man who was paralyzed. We made that. We were describing that earlier. That he was brought in by his friends, and he was told to walk, and he takes up his pallet and walks.
Oh, I got you.
That's what they seem to be saying, that it's a reference to that story.
I got you. Okay, that would make sense to me then. Okay, good. I put this up here, and I wanted to ask you if you have any knowledge of what they're talking about. I don't know what this means. It says high-tech test shatters claim ancient inscription is first century proof of Christianity. Do you have any idea what this tablet is or what they're talking about?
No, I'm not familiar with this one.
All right, that's not important then, because I just found it interesting. And then, of course, they have a piece of the Dead Sea Scroll that talks about the existence of Jesus. It says the Messiah. What's that say? The Messiah was supposed to
overthrow the enemies.
And so if you're going to make up a Messiah, you'd make up a powerful Messiah. You wouldn't make up somebody who was just humiliated, tortured, and then killed by his enemies. I don't know about all of that. What do you say?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was a community in Qumran in the Dead Sea, south part of the Dead Sea area, and they saw that Judaism was very corrupt, and siding too much with the Romans, and they saw themselves as sort of like children of light. That God was going to have this galactic battle against all the evil in the world.
Yeah.
And only the pure righteous people were going to be saved from this great calamity. And they existed from about 150 BC until 70 AD, when the Romans came and destroyed the temple and burned down Jerusalem. And it's believed that they had the Hebrew Bible and all these different texts that they had, that they hid them in the caves and to retrieve them later. Well, they never got them back. Either they died in this battle against the Romans, or they just left them there. Anyway, that's what that's about.
Okay. Said Jesus may not have been divine, but he was real. So whether you believe that Jesus was divine or not, the evidence points to the fact that Jesus was a real person. Proof like the Pilate stone, written sources from Jewish and Roman authorities establish the existence of many people and places mentioned in the Gospels. While the followers of Jesus had an incentive to claim he was divine, their writings also come from people who met the real Jesus when he was alive. And it goes on to continue. Mike, is that in and of itself enough, or do people always need more?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning. You have the evidence, you have the proof that you're looking at, you have the Gospels, claim to be eyewitnesses, and it's what you do with it. Do you believe that this is all true and you base your life on this, or you reject it? Even people in Jesus's own day, some believed and some rejected it.
Yeah.
And it just comes down to, do you have faith or do you not have faith to believe that this is true? And it's an individual decision.
Right.
These are the many faces of Jesus, historical perceptions of the face of Jesus Christ. If you're looking at this, and I want to point to the upper left-hand corner, that is what almost every scholar refers to as what Jesus would actually look like. And if you take that photo, and interesting, you can do this, if you take that photo and compare it with the Shroud of Turin, they're almost identical.
Yeah.
So
I said that earlier, that many people believe that their common version or image of Jesus goes back to the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
Because it's very similar.
Of course, there is Jesus, there is God. Tomorrow we will talk about the existence of God. I want to leave everyone tonight with something interesting I discovered. Mike, I want you to comment on this if you feel you're able.
Okay.
Let's take a look.
Jesus really revealed the name of the Antichrist? I will report the facts. You can decide. In Luke chapter 10, verse 18, Jesus said these words, "And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning falling from the heavens." These words are written in Greek and translated to English. However, Jesus spoke these words originally in Aramaic, which is the most ancient form of Hebrew. As you know, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. If a modern Jewish rabbi were to speak these words of Jesus today, he would speak them in Hebrew, much the same way that Jesus would have spoken them. So in Hebrew, Jesus said that he saw Satan falling as lightning from the heights or from the heavens. So what are the words for lightning and heights or heavens in Hebrew? From the Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, word number 1299, a primitive root word meaning to lighten or lightning or to cast forth, the word is barak. In the Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, word number 1300, lightning, or by analogy a gleam, a flashing sword, or a brightness or a glittering, the Hebrew word is barak. So lightning, or a flash of light, in Hebrew is pronounced Barak or Barak. Now consider this amazing fact. The book of Isaiah is the source of origin for the Christian concept and understanding of Satan, or Lucifer, as Isaiah calls him, in chapter 14, especially in verses 12 through 19. In Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14, Lucifer, or Satan, is credited with these words, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. In the verses of Isaiah that refer directly to Lucifer, several times it is mentioned that Satan has fallen from the heights, or from the heavens. The Hebrew word used in this text for the heights from which Satan fell is Strong's Hebrew word 1116, pronounced Bama. Bama is most commonly used to refer to a high sacred place, as well as to the heights of the heavens or the clouds. In Hebrew, the letter Wa is often transliterated as a U. Some scholars use the O for this transliteration. It is primarily used as a conjunction to join concepts together. So to join in Hebrew poetry the concept of lightning, or barak, and a high place like heaven or the heights of heaven, the letter U, or sometimes O, the Hebrew letter Wa, would be used. So, Barak O Bama, or Barak U Bama, in Hebrew poetry, similar to the style written in Isaiah, would translate literally as lightning and the heights or the heavens, or lightning from the heights of the skies or the heavens. The word Satan is Satan in Hebrew, a direct translation. So back to Jesus' prophecy in Luke chapter 10, verse 18. If spoken by a Jewish rabbi today, influenced by the poetry of Isaiah, he would say these words in Hebrew, the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, as, and I saw Satan as Barak Ubama. Did Jesus reveal to us the name of the Antichrist? I report, you decide.
Okay.
Say you what to that?
Wow.
Interesting coincidence. I don't know Hebrew well enough to comment on that.
It's
Although
certainly well. You can certainly speculate. You can
he's
offer
not in
your
power
opinion.
anymore, so I don't know what he can do of a supernatural nature when you're just a public.
It is kind of strange, though, isn't it? It is kind of strange. I suppose, there are people even now, ladies and gentlemen, there are people that are taking Donald Trump and saying, yes, Donald Trump is in the Bible. The sound of the trump, bump the Trump, and this the Trump. Okay, we know it's in the Bible. Okay, but look, you can make a case for anything if you want. I put that on there as kind of a head scratcher. I don't know if you really had an opinion on it. I was hoping that you would. I was hoping that you would say it's all a bunch of coincidence, serendipity.
We'll see.
It's certainly interesting for sure. Amelia, since you don't know what's coming up next week, Amelia, I have to tell everyone. My turn to tell everybody what's coming up. On Monday, we are not doing our BS week next week, folks. We are doing
our Monday. We are
one night of BS, and Tuesday of next week on July the 29th.
30th.
July 30th. My old friend from some years ago is going to visit us again. Her name is Jerry Jewell. You remember her as Jerry on television's The Facts of Life. She'll be with us. Yay. Promoting a new book. And on Wednesday, the 31st, from the television show Too Close for Comfort back in the day, we're going to talk to Jim J. Bullock, who played Monroe Ficus on that amazing show. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I got a whole bunch of folks coming in. Wait till you see this. It's a who's who of Hollywood, folks. Joining us also, coming up in, I believe, please tell me, Amelia, November.
Yes.
Kevin Sorbo,
Yes.
Hercules from television, will be joining us. And I have confirmed, folks, he's coming back. George Schlatter.
Yes.
God willing, and he lives to be 100. George Schlatter is 95 years old, and we're going to bring him back here. He is the guy who created Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and has worked with everybody from Judy Garland to Eminem and everyone in between. And so it's going to be a pretty good. It's going to be a good week next week, I think.
Oh yeah.
Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, and God gives us some more time on this crazy little planet we call Earth. It should be good anyway.
Absolutely.
It's as good as we make it, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I do believe that Jesus does exist, because when my son was 4 years old, he did tell me that
you better believe Jesus exists, because if you don't, I'm going to knock you out,
no,
and you're going to
because
meet
you
him.
know how people say that he doesn't exist, he doesn't. But my 4-year-old son at the time did tell me that he
remember something. Listen to my words, Amelia. It's all about faith. You gotta have
4
faith.
years old. Yeah, he did tell me, because he was crying.
Nothing matters without faith. Read the book of James. My favorite book in the entire Bible, the book of James. I love that book.
Yeah.
Mike Lynch, you are a remarkable, knowledgeable, learned man. You are welcome back here anytime. You'll be here tomorrow night for the third. God bless you, man. 3 nights in a row you're hanging out with me.
I think I'll manage it.
Male bonding over here, ladies and gentlemen. You're witnessing. This is male bonding. Then I'm going to bring Mike back a lot more.
We're going to have 2 additional people with us tomorrow as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Frick and Frack are going to be here. Wait till you see these 2 guys. Oh, my God. You want to talk about, roughnecks? That these guys would have been great apostles. Because they are ruffians, brother. Let me tell you. They really are. On behalf of Amelia, the Pitbull Chapman, and Mike Lynch, the man with the word. Man, he's got the word, boy. I'll tell you what. I am Angelo, the Mad Dog Discipio. We will see you tomorrow night. God willing, the creek goes rise. Be good to each other, folks. Please, for the love of God, be good to each other. Take care, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.